Hello.
Hello. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. So here we are in week 2 of trying to have these virtual remote Divrei Torah. Last week I think went very well, so hopefully I think this week will go as well, as long as internet continues to hold out on us. This week we are reading Parshat Vayakhel Pekudei, which are the last 2 portions in the Torah, or in the book of Exodus. And so therefore, we're gonna move on to the book of Vayikra next week, and it is also Shabbat HaChodesh. It is the Shabbat before Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which of course means that we are moving ever closer to Passover, and this is going to be certainly a Passover for the books as to how it will go and what seders will look like, and that'll be certainly a conversation we start having probably next week. That's the deadline I give myself to start thinking about it anyway. Was next week I'm going to start thinking about Passover, because who knows what the world will look like in that moment. But for now, we are not yet at Passover, and what I wanted to start looking at today is actually a passage from the Talmud that we will see how it eventually connects back to our Torah readings. So how can I pull this up? Here it is. And share. And what are you looking at right now? What do you see?
Shabbat
147b.
Fantastic. All right, you're seeing what I want you to see. It's always a good thing. And let me just pull up my little spotlight pointer because that's always nice for me. Okay, so we are reading in Shabbat 147b. The rabbis were having a conversation about taking showers on Shabbat and whether or not you can dry yourself if you've bathed in cave water. And of course, we're going to just make a sudden sharp left turn. And now we're talking about Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. He happened there to a place where they were discussing. That's how we make the connection, the rabbis with their stream of consciousness. Rabbi Elazar ben Arach ended up in this place to Phrygia and Deomset, places that I'm not familiar with. And he was drawn after them. And we're not entirely sure what that means, but it seems like they were places where learning was certainly not emphasized. And in fact, probably there were other pursuits, other more hedonistic pursuits that entertained him, and he forgot his learning, his Torah learning. He had been a scholar and now not so much. And so one day he returned, he came back to the community, and he stood to read from a Torah scroll. He stood to read on Shabbat morning. He got up to read from the Torah, and he was supposed to read, "This month shall be for you, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem," and instead he read, "Hacharash Hayala Libam," have their hearts become deaf. And you can see down here that he was misreading the Hebrew. It's very close, the words that are supposed to be, this top line here, and the words that he actually read. You can sort of understand how he made the mistakes that he made. Someone who's not familiar with reading Hebrew text could easily make this mistake. And
yes, all students make the mistake of Reish and Daled.
Reish and Daled and Bet and Chaf, and the Yud and the Zayin is a little bit harder to pull off, but you know, these things, I've seen stranger mistakes made, certainly. And this was certainly must have been an embarrassing moment for Elazar ben Arach, right? He gets up to read from the Torah and he's reading the words entirely wrong, and I'm sure he was corrected word by word by word by the Gabbai who was standing there. And the sages, everyone else who was gathered around, prayed and asked for God to have mercy on him, and his learning was restored to him. So this is where we're going to start our conversation. And just to give a little bit of context, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach was a student of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So that we're looking now in Pirkei Avot. And Yochanan ben Zakkai receives the oral tradition from Hillel and Shammai. So we're in a very, very powerful, very, very elite genealogy at the moment. Hillel teaches to Yochanan ben Zakkai. Yochanan ben Zakkai had 5 preeminent disciples, and Elazar ben Arach was one of them. And Yochanan ben Zakkai has really eloquent and beautiful and poetic words to say about each of his students. And about Elazar ben Arach, Rabbi Yochanan says that he is like a spring that ever gathers force, that his learning is greater and stronger and more powerful with each passing moment, with each passing day. And beyond that, Abba Shaul said in the name of Yochanan ben Zakkai, that if all of the sages of Israel were on one side of a scale, and Rabbi Elazar ben Hyrcanus, who in the place that we skipped was held up as a particularly preeminent learner, and Elazar ben Arach were on the other side of this scale, that he would actually outweigh them all, that he was the most impressive student, the most impressive scholar who existed in all of Israel in the time while he was an active student of Yochanan ben Zakkai. But of course, we see that he doesn't maintain that position, that he doesn't stay as this preeminent student, and he instead has a bit of a fall. But however, the sages pray for him. They pray that his learning is restored to him. And the lesson that we learn from this, that Rabbi Nehorai says, exile yourself to a place of Torah, and do not say that the Torah will follow you. Your colleagues will establish in your hands, and do not rely on your own understanding alone. It was taught Rabbi Nehorai was not actually this rabbi's name, but he was Rabbi Nehemiah. And some say that this was actually Rabbi Elazar ben Arach himself. And why was he called Rabbi Nehorai? It's because he would illuminate manhir, the eyes of the sages in halacha. So Elazar ben Arach, when his learning is returned to him, understands all that he sacrificed by going away from the people, by going away from the learning and the Torah, and he suffers through it. But he learns that you need to pursue Torah yourself. You need to surround yourself with people who are students of the Torah, and not simply trust that it will work out. So what are you looking at now? What do you see?
Again, Shabbat 147b, but very small.
Okay, so all right, I'm just trying to see a way to load multiple things so that I can see one thing and you can see another. How about now?
Still the same one.
Same one, but is it?
Oh, now it's different.
Now it's Exodus. And
Exodus.
Is it full screen?
Yeah. And it's readable. It's fine.
Yeah. All we see is Exodus. All we see is Exodus. We don't see three things.
You don't see anything else?
No.
Right.
Okay. All right. So we'll work with that then. Very good. Oh, that's the problem. Okay. So immediately before this session started, my computer crashed on me, and so a couple of files are not where they're supposed to be. But hopefully, yes, here it is. All right. Very good. So we move from the narrative of Elazar ben Arach, and I want to talk about the text that he read. Right, he was supposed to read "Chodesh hazeh lachem," and this is something that if we were in shul tomorrow morning, we would be reading together. We would understand this. This is actually would be the maftir that we read tomorrow morning, because tomorrow is Shabbat HaChodesh. And so we would be reading from the book of Exodus, Exodus chapter 12, verses, actually it's 1 through 20 that we'll read. What we're looking at here is verses 1 and 2. And so we're reading about the beginning of the Jewish calendar, the beginning of this time where the Israelites leave Egypt and enter into the desert and begin their new existence. So in context, what these verses here are talking about: this month shall mark for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first of months of the year for you. In context, what this is saying is that this is the beginning of the Jewish calendar. And whenever we talk about the number of month, whichever first, second, third month that we're in, the first month is the month of Nisan. Even though the year begins at the beginning of Tishrei with Rosh Hashanah, Nisan is the first month and Tishrei is the seventh month. It's a strange way to count, but it's how we do it. It's also the beginning of our national life free of slavery. It's, according to some measures, the moment where we become a people instead of a collection of slaves. And according to many rabbis, it's also the moment where really the narrative that the Torah could have begun, because the Torah is meant to be our guide in life. And this is the first time that we have a mitzvah, a commandment given in the Torah. This is the first mitzvah given to Israel from God. And so you have to imagine the Israelites in this moment are feeling an incredible moment of anticipation, right? This is a huge inflection point in their lives. Everything that comes next is going to be just fundamentally different from what it is that came before. And so this moment, this new month, is a time of anticipation. And centuries later, generations later, as Elazar ben Arach is called to the Torah in order to read this maftir, as we wish we would be able to do tomorrow morning as well, he gets up and he tries to read HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, he tries to read these verses, and it's also an inflection point in his life. But instead of it being a moment of anticipation, it really becomes a moment of shame, where he notices exactly how far he's fallen from the state of being this ever-strengthening fountain. He's now someone who can't even read 3 simple words in the Torah and embarrasses himself publicly. But it also becomes an inflection point, because while this moment in itself is a moment of shame for him, it's also a moment where all of his friends and all of his colleagues and all of his former classmates pray for his sake, pray that he will be able to return to the scholar that he was. And so it's a moment where he begins to return up. And so while his life had been on this downward trajectory, it's a moment of inflection where he's able to now return to the person that he was. And I think we have to be able to recognize as well that this week, this Shabbat HaChodesh, is yet another inflection point. But this one is an inflection point in our lives, in our community, and really in our world, because we're now, for us, a full week into this new normal, whatever that is right now, and even as it seems to change from day to day, we're getting a small sense of what it could be or what it might look like. And we're starting to see how we can come together in new ways, in this way, digitally and through phone calls and through other approaches, because we've lost our previous way, at least only temporarily, but still we've lost our previous way of coming together. And so it becomes really this moment, for me at least, a moment of fear. It's a moment where I'm not sure what's going to come next. And I hear stories of how things are going in other countries. I was hearing about what's happening in Italy and Iran this morning, and how their medical systems are overwhelmed. And I'm hearing stories about how that's a very real possibility in our medical system as well. And so I'm looking at this inflection point in our lives of what could still be to come, and how things are so vastly different from the way that they were just 2 or 3 weeks ago. And things are going to be different now. And we're forced not only to come up with new ways to gather as a community, but we need to come up with new ways to communicate with one another. That we can no longer shake hands, we can no longer hug, we can no longer even come in to proximity of one another. The 6-foot distance, as we talked about in our lunch and learn yesterday, the 4 amot, which happens to be 6 feet, the personal space, according to both the rabbis and the CDC, as it turns out, means that there is this distance that is going to physically separate us for the foreseeable future. And so it's a frightening time, and it's one that we need to come up with a new way to adapt. And in each of these cases, it's the case of the Israelites back at the beginning, where this verse was first read, and then in the time of Elazar ben Arach, when he read it and realized how far he'd fallen. And in our case today, it's a moment where things are changing. But I think it's also possible to see from the experience of Elazar ben Arach that this change can be one for the better, as much as it is hard to find a way out of the depths of this moment right now. If he was able to regain his learning and to become the scholar that he once was, and to bring light to all of the world, or to all of the scholars, then for us too in this moment, there should be ways that we can grow because of this, that we can strengthen ourselves because of this, as long as we resolve to make it so. And I think the challenge that we're now faced with is, of course, how? What are the things that we are able to do in order to strengthen ourselves and increase our learning and develop the strong community that will sustain us through this moment. I believe that our Torah portion this morning actually will give us a good approach, something that can help us with it. But before we dive into that, I want to ask all of you the ways that you can see us, that you hopefully already found, but other ideas that you have of how we can strengthen ourselves, our relationships, and our community in this difficult moment.
Just having the access to these Zoom meetings and classes, is, a number of years ago, we have the situation, we wouldn't see each other for months, we'd never get any kind of learning or anything, but at least we're able to do this. And if we can keep this up, and hopefully more people will join over time, we could stay more connected.
Absolutely, yeah. Technology is an incredible gift right now, allowing us to see one another. I've seen you, Mark, frequently, and it's been good. It's been comforting to me to see your face and to hear your voice in a way that I'm used to, but through a new avenue, because that's our reality. Absolutely. Any other?
Got to figure out a way to do a remote kiddush, though.
Remote kiddush is the challenge. I think that's definitely going to be tricky.
I was going to say, I think at about 1 p.m. tomorrow, I'm going to have a little bit of bourbon and some egg salad, and maybe call up Bob and see if he can tell me a bad joke.
Not a dirty joke, because he says this one's clean.
Yeah, well, when there's no women present, he does. Well, he says they're dirty. They're not really that dirty.
He's fairly clean for the rabbi too.
But
we could handle, right?
Yeah, but getting to the subject at hand, there's ways we can keep things going, like the Zoom. But what struck me was, and now I can't remember the name of the rabbi, but the rabbi whose learning, outweighed the learning of all other rabbis and Jews.
Elazar ben Arach.
Yes, from all time until then. And, he goes away for a little while and it's all gone. He loses it. And now maybe saying that he outweighed everybody else's knowledge might have been a little bit of hyperbole, but let's just take it literally and say that even if it was true, it just showed how fragile maybe that was, that here is somebody who has got more knowledge than everybody who's ever lived and who is living, and it's just gone. And I think we're all being reminded of how fragile so many things are that we took for granted, not just, with us in our synagogue, but the whole world, that's everything we know about could be crashing down, and that everything was just so much more fragile than we had realized. But I guess that there's a hopeful note, because then it said, eventually, if I remember the reading right, that his knowledge came back. Mm-hmm. And so, that hopefully everything that we're losing, and we unfortunately, we can't sugarcoat it. There's going to just be so much that's lost. There's so much already that's lost. I mean, I'm worrying about my little world. Oh, my billing this week has been terrible. And, we get caught up in our own dumb little problems. But meanwhile, I know people who have already lost their jobs because of this. I know people who are freelancers and musicians and things whose income is now going to be zero for the foreseeable future, and they don't get unemployment. And, things are going to be terrible for a while, but there is hope that there will be light at the end of the tunnel, and that at some point we can hope that everything will come back, just as it did for the rabbi.
Very nice.
And I think, Mike, you're raising a really important point, and I think we can take something from the way that his learning came back, right? It came back through the prayers and the support of his community, of his colleagues. It was not something that he was able to go and simply study, right? He realized his priorities were wrong, and so he picked up a book instead of I don't know, whatever it was he was doing beforehand. He the community brought him back in. He wanted to come back, and the community welcomed him back in, and they prayed and they supported him and they helped him along in this process. That it's not something that can be done by ourselves. I think your point about the fragility of our system and the people who are suffering is a really important one. And the only way to make it through that fragility is, I think, together. I think that's a vital lesson for us. Absolutely. Any other thoughts as to how we can move through this, how we can grow out of this and strengthen ourselves and our families and our relationships?
Well, I don't know about the rest of you, but one of the ways I'm growing is gaining a lot of weight, because one of the things you can do still is eat.
You're literally growing.
Literally growing before your very eyes. It's unbelievable. It's like you sit around and it's like, well, I read for 3 hours already. I've watched 5 TV shows. I took an hour walk. What could I do now? Oh, I can have something to eat.
But the walk is really important. You know, I'm understanding that fresh air is still allowed.
Yes.
As long as you're 6 feet from anyone else.
Right.
Then fresh air is encouraged, I think, even. I don't know about that.
Well, I went to the preserves with my husband and our dog. We went to the Rockefeller Preserve and T-Town.
There tomorrow.
There were a lot of people, but everybody stayed, except for the dogs. They stayed their proper distance, and it was lovely. I mean, just to be together and stroll and talk and watch the dog, it was fun.
I mean, I think there are opportunities here to get out into the world, to go for hour-long walks, to go to different places than we usually go to. That hopefully this will give us the strength to persevere and give us a better sense of what exists around us. Might be a way for it to create that personal strength. And I think, you know, Barbara, your point about people staying the proper distance, there is this really great sense of we're in it together. I went for a really long walk with Eliza yesterday, actually, to drop off some food for someone. And we were walking down the sidewalk in downtown Pelham, or just before downtown Pelham. And it's where it sort of meanders through a hill. And there were people coming towards us, and we made eye contact, we looked at each other, we smiled, and they veered off towards one side of the sidewalk and we veered off towards the other. And it was a moment where we knew that we were doing the same thing. We had the same values, and it wasn't a moment of fear. It wasn't a moment of concern or distrust, but that this is how we are going to interact right now. And we are in this moment together. And so even as we encountered each other from a distance and without any words, it was a way to see that we're not alone, even as we're physically distant.
I also found that making the calls on my list, it was accepted with such open arms. People were so happy that we were looking in on them, especially the older people.
Oh, yeah.
I think I got as much out of it. I mean, I had conversations with, say, Leah Lenny and Eleanor Dreyfus that I never would have had under different circumstances.
That's great.
I think that's an important thing, and there's no reason that shouldn't be ongoing. And people can't, you know, just be the board has been asked to make calls to the entire community, but everyone is certainly able to pick up a phone and to call someone and to call another person and to call another person and to create community in that way, and that one-to-one of I'm going to call you and then maybe you'll call me. So I think that's a really important tool in our lives as well. So we're now going to turn to this week's Torah portion, actually, to Parashat Vayakhel, and see a way in which I think that we can learn from that how we can also achieve this. I'm going to go back to the text right here. Okay, actually, I would really love to get out of this view.
You're an expert on this.
I'm trying. It's not doing exactly what I want right now, but that's all right. What if I just hit that button?
They didn't teach you this at JTS?
You know, there are many things that I was taught at JTS, and strangely, surprisingly, this was not one of them. Okay, hold on. Let me try this one more time.
Rabbi, just, the passage that you just looked at about the beginning of this is the beginning of the year.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I was a little late to this, but did you talk about that as applying to our current circumstances?
That's actually how we got to this conversation, that this is a new situation. This is going to be a new normal for a while. And while it's a scary time, we looked at two other examples of how this played out in Jewish history, and it became an inflection point for improvement and for growth. And so that's how we got on the question of how can this moment be such an inflection point for us as well. Exactly. Yes.
Okay. Well, that's good, because it's not only the beginning, but it also in the section tells you what's coming up.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wish I knew what was coming up in our lives at the moment. But yeah, I think yes. So looking at our Torah portion this morning, Parshat Vayakhel Pekudei. So Vayakhel actually means, and I think this is serendipitous for us, and maybe not so coincidental. Vayakhel means, and he gathered. Moses gathered all of Israel together. And what I think is important about that is the roots. Kuf He Lamed is the same root that we use to describe a kihila, a religious community, a synagogue community. Moses turned the people into a kihila in this moment as they were about to build the Mishkan. And so that coming together is something that happened in our history, and it's something that we're trying to figure out how to achieve in this moment as well. And so, but the verse that I want to look at is this one that's up on your screen right now, a few verses later, where Moses says, "And let all among you who are skilled come and make all that the Lord has commanded. Kol chacham lev." And well, that's probably what he meant. The actual language of the Hebrew says that every single person who has a wise heart, whose heart is filled with wisdom, they should come and they should do this work. And the question is raised, Rashi raises the question, what does it mean for a person, or no, Ha'emek Devar raises the question, I'm sorry, who is the person who has a wise heart? Well, obviously the rabbi is going to think, who has wisdom that Moses would refer to as the scholars, right? So we might think that Moses is only talking to the people who have scholarship and who have wisdom of that sort in this moment. But Ha'emek Devar says that this actually isn't only the scholars that Moses was talking to, but it's everyone who fears heaven. If they would come to participate in the making of the tabernacle, then God would assist them, even if they had never learned a skilled craft prior to this. So for me, this is a really, really important message, because as we're looking to find a way forward in our lives in this moment, this is saying that there are certain people that we obviously are going to turn to. We are going to turn to the medical professionals. We are going to turn to the political leaders. We're going to turn to people who have the expertise and the ability to lead us through this difficult time. And they are essential. And we are appreciative of their knowledge and their sacrifice and the real risks that they are taking in leading us and in doing the work that they're doing in this moment. But not only that, and not only them, but this is a responsibility in the case of the Torah portion, the building the tabernacle, but in our case as well, making our way through this difficult time is a responsibility not only of those leaders and those experts, but of all who fear heaven. And that if we all come to participate in this process in whatever way we can, that we will gain assistance, that heaven will help us, even if we've never learned a skilled craft prior to this, that we all have some ability to do this in a way that we never realized, and that we should find a way to move forward with. And in the Midrash, the power, I came across this just a few minutes before this class started, and really was moved by it. The Midrash on this verse says that there were 42 different labors, 42 different tasks that were listed that needed to be done for building the tabernacle. And that God sanctified these specific 42 labors in order to preemptively nullify the 42 sacrifices that Balak, the son of Zippor, brought in order to curse Israel. So later in the book of Numbers, Balak, the king of Moab, is going to come and he's going to try and get Bilam to curse Israel. And in order to do that, he first offers these 42 different sacrifices to appease God, or probably some other gods in his mind. And the work that we're doing, or that our ancestors did in building the tabernacle, would in some way nullify those sacrifices, that each of those negative acts was nullified by a good act. They were nullified through the tabernacle, about which were listed 42 labors. And this is why, it's because our ancestors built the Mishkan. Bilam would said, instead of cursing Israel, he said, "How goodly are you, tents Jacob, your dwelling places Israel. Matovu oalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael." And so I don't know that anything that we can do as individuals or as a community can nullify the challenges and the difficulties and the risks and the dangers and the harm caused by this situation that we find ourselves in, by this crisis, by this disease, and by the social and economic damage that is coming from it. But I do think that we can mitigate it. We can find a way to help keep people safe. The things that we're doing right now, the fact that we're meeting remotely when all of us who are on this call right now are, thank God, healthy, is an act that we are doing in order to mitigate, to nullify the spread of this disease, and things that we can do as well to help people to make it through this difficult time financially and socially, that we can, as the calls that Barbara was talking about, that we can do these things to help carry people through to the other side, so that the harm that would have come from this, that can still come from this, will be nullified, and we'll be able to come out it stronger and more connected. And each of us, as long as we have this wise heart, as long as we have this willingness and this desire to do this important good work, is able to achieve this. Each of us is able to be a part of it, no matter our role, no matter our job, no matter our place in the community, that this is something that all of us can pull together. And I think a final point from this week's Torah portion, which is Moses says this, right? He says, "All of Israel, I want you to offer all of these gifts for the construction of the tabernacle." And they do in this incredible, overwhelming way. They come together and they give and they give and they give and they give. And this is something that never happens any other time in the Torah. Moses tells Israel, and usually Israel sort of, yeah, whatever, Moses, we're going to go off and do our own thing. Sometimes they listen, oftentimes they ignore. But in this moment, Israel is so moved by the project and the importance of what's in front of them that they give so much that Moses actually has to tell them, stop, enough. You've given too much. We don't need any more. And I think that's the level of dedication that is required from us in this moment as well, that we need to all be so committed to this project of maintaining community and helping one another out, that people should say to us, okay, enough. You've taken care of me and we're good. The community is strong and I'm going to make it through. We need to recognize the importance of this moment and give with an open heart and with a wise heart, finding a way to help ourselves through it. So
I think one of the things that's important is the 42 labors.
Mm-hmm.
Each person brought or came with what they could give, what function they could perform, and everybody felt empowered to be part of the project.
Yes, absolutely. We each have an ability. It might not be everything. It might not seem like so much, but Moses empowered them, exactly as you say. Moses empowered them to see the importance of their small part. And that, I think, is something that we need right now as well. Thank you, Barbara.
Yeah, and I think also this is Michael that one of the I can't remember now. Back one of the readings said something like, even if you don't have any particular skill, show up, and I'll give you a skill. And so I guess that resonated with me because it took me a while to learn that a big part of Judaism is just showing up, whether it's a shiva or ham-handedly trying to help build the sukkah, without losing a finger or whatever. And for me that was inspiring, because for me, as someone who isn't particularly knowledgeable or well educated, I always would feel and still feel a little like that there's not a lot I can always add, but that I can still add something just by kind of showing up. And so I don't know what that means in this time that we're having, showing up. Well, I guess those of us are here, we're showing up to this, but I think that's inspiring that it doesn't, we all can bring whatever skills we have, but you don't have to think of what skill you might have. You don't need a skill. You just need to kind of show up.
You know about Woody Allen, right? He said 80% of life is showing up. So, it's the 80-20 rule.
Mm-hmm. And showing up means something different now than it did before. So Joel just asked through the chat function if we know what these 42 tasks were and what the significance is. So according to the midrash there, if you were to look at the verses that came immediately following that, there are 42 times where the word et is written, the direct object signifier. So there are 42 different items listed that needed to be constructed, needed to be woven, needed to be built, needed to be shaped in making the Mishkan. So I think the Torah, according to this midrash anyway, the Torah has just an explicit list of 42 things that needed to be built. And the significance of the number 42 is obviously that it's the answer to everything, life and the universe. Because Douglas Adams is right about that too. So tomorrow morning, if we had been in Shul, we would finish this Torah reading and we would conclude the final Aliyah with Chazak, Chazak, V'nit Chazek. May you be strengthened, may you be strengthened, and may we all be strengthened. And while we won't be reading the Torah communally tomorrow morning, I think this is a blessing and a prayer that we all need very much right now. The idea that each of us needs to be individually strengthened, and that through our individual strengths and our individual contributions, no matter how big or small, we can all be strengthened and come out of this stronger than we were. So I say to all of you, Chazak, Chazak, V'nit Chazek. I'm gonna end this recording now.